Thomas Edison made 1093, and he died at 84. I'm now 88. My number is 3,500.
The minds behind the world's greatest inventions are stranger than you'll ever believe. I'm Mike with List25, and from a man being cremated into a frisbee to the astronomer who got his pet puma drunk, here are 25 weird facts about our great inventors. 25. Nikola Tesla's obsession with pigeons. The master of electricity and hydropower and creator of over 300 patents, Nikola Tesla was a genius by any measure. Despite his triumphs, though, towards the end of his life, he became increasingly excluded from the scientific community and detached from reality. Strangest of all, he developed a deep connection with pigeons, going so far as to claim that he had fallen in love with a pigeon that visited him in his New York hotel room. He said that the animal gave him purpose in life. 24. Thomas Edison's spirit phone. By far, Nikola Tesla's biggest rival was Thomas Edison, a man whose business-minded, dominating approach to science made him millions and left him remembered as America's most successful inventor. Some of those inventions were more practical than others. At the age of 73, a Forbes magazine article revealed that Edison was working on a device made to contact the dead. According to Edison, the so-called spirit phone would have used scientific methods to harness the tiny units of life within the human body he believed were scattered into the environment once a person died. 23. Alfred Nobel had a fear of being buried alive. Did you know that the fear of being buried alive actually has its own word? Taphophobia. One of the most famous people in history to have it was Alfred Nobel, the Swedish inventor and science enthusiast who dedicated his wealth to establishing the most prestigious prize in the field, the Nobel Prize. Terrified of being wrongly declared dead and buried alive, he even outlined his will that his veins be opened and a team of doctors verified no sign of life before his body was cremated. Despite his wishes, Alfred's remains are buried at a famous cemetery in Sweden, alongside other famous Swedish people. 22. Robert Kearns and the intermittent windshield wiper. In the early 1960s, an engineer named Robert Kearns was inspired to create a windshield wiper that acted more like the blinking of a human eye. He was sure that if he could market and build the idea properly, it would make him millions. Kearns was right, but his first mistake was taking it to Ford. His idea wasn't adopted immediately, but after Kearns set up his own facility to create the product, Ford installed it into their cars. Kearns went to court, and it took more than 30 years out of his life before he was eventually awarded $30 million. He had already spent a third of that in legal fees, and after presenting most of the cases himself, he had been so consumed that his marriage deteriorated. 21. Ethan Zuckerman and the pop-up ad. There's nothing more annoying when browsing the web than pesky, unsolicited pop-up advertisements. And if you want someone to blame for that, you can start with Ethan Zuckerman. Zuckerman was a part of Tripod.com in the 90s, which led the way in making profit out of the emerging technology of the internet. It was there that he was faced with a problem to solve: how to avoid associating their websites with undesirable advertisements and still maintain the revenue. His solution was to have the advertisement open up in a completely new window, meaning that it didn't appear directly on the page of their website. 20. The man who invented the frisbee was cremated and made into a frisbee. Should a dead man's wishes always be followed? Sometimes they border on the absurd. Take Walter Morrison, for example, the inventor of the frisbee. His will stipulated that when he died, he wanted to be cremated. Okay, so far so good. Next, though, he wanted to be turned into his life's work, a frisbee. Morrison had developed the concept in the 1930s as flying cake pans, a product that transformed into the frisbee, one of the most successful toys in history. These terms of his left his family with the task of cremating him and then having his ashes molded into a frisbee. 19. The man who invented basketball. It's hard to imagine that there could be just one man behind a sport that's become one of the most popular in the world, but it's true. James Naismith created the rules of basketball when he was given the job of designing an indoor game that was non-physical and stimulating for students at Springfield College in Massachusetts. Even more impressive, Naismith was only given 2 weeks to do it. Combining the best elements of a variety of different games, he developed 13 fundamental rules, which were initially played with a soccer ball and a peach basket as a goal. Over the next few years, the game exploded in popularity, spreading through colleges and high schools until it became professional in the 1920s, more than 3 decades after Naismith had invented it. And if you want to actually see the rules themselves, go to Lawrence, Kansas. I was there, my cousins live there. I went there for their bar mitzvah. And if you go to their arena on University of Kansas, if you go to their arena, they actually have them. They're right behind glass, the actual 13 rules. I got to see it. It was really cool. 18. Creating Band-Aids for his wife. If you've ever reached for a Band-Aid after cutting yourself, then you have Earl Dixon's wife to thank. Dixon was working in the cotton industry in the 20s for medical giant Johnson & Johnson. The company had been making bandages for decades, but it was Dixon who would bring them their most successful version. He was inspired by his wife Josephine, who often accidentally cut herself while cooking. Since she didn't need big bandages, Dixon instead attached sticky tape to small bandages, which could be applied easily. After he took the workaround made for his wife to Johnson & Johnson, it became the Band-Aid, and was soon found in almost every home in America. 17. Robert Adler and the remote control. These days, we can control our televisions with our phones or through our voice, but every TV still comes equipped with a remote control. In the 60s, the biggest and most important change to this technology came from a physicist named Robert Adler, who innovated a way for these remotes to connect to TVs through ultrasound instead of light. Over the next couple of decades, about 9 million TVs with the technology were sold. This success helped Adler climb the ranks of the company he worked for, Zenith, all the way to vice president. 16. John Dunlop made tires for his son's tricycle. You wouldn't think that tire innovations would come from a veterinarian, but John Boyd Dunlop was no regular vet. A brilliant but reclusive man, Dunlop's success didn't come out of any kind of determination to be rich. Instead, his work to create the pneumatic tire, meaning that one was full of air, was motivated by his immediate family. He was on a mission to make his son's tricycle more comfortable and to travel quicker. Dunlop later found out that an earlier design had already been patented, but by repackaging it with other patents as a different company allowed, he grew the Dunlop company into one that still exists today, which recorded sales of over $20 billion in 2022. 15. Steve Jobs' all-fruit diet. There's no doubt that Steve Jobs revolutionized the technological world. The MacBook, the iPhone, and a host of other Apple products were created from his out-of-the-box thinking. His radicalism extended to his personal life too. He would often go on fasts or purges, at times refraining from eating for as long as a week. When he did return, his diet mainly consisted of fruits and vegetables, but this diet would eventually lead to his demise. When tests revealed that Jobs had pancreatic cancer, he opted to attempt to treat it with fruit rather than chemotherapy and conventional medicine. Years later, in 2011, he died from it. 14. Dr. Yoshiro Nakamatsu. If you thought Thomas Edison's 1,000 patents made him a prolific inventor, then brace yourself for Dr. Yoshiro Nakamatsu. According to him, the Japanese inventor has 3,300 attributed to his name. Many of these are disputed by other inventors, including the floppy disk, which is usually attributed to IBM's Alan Shugart in the 1960s, but Dr. Nakamatsu claims to have invented the technology more than a decade earlier, which is backed up by a patent he filed in 1952. Floppy disks use a kind of magnetic encoding to create a thin plastic device of information that can be read, edited, and copied. None of this was included in Nakamatsu's patent, but IBM has admitted that several of his inventions have been licensed by the tech giant. 13. Einstein committed to a daily walk. Just going for a short walk can clear your head. Don't believe me? Well, take a leaf out of Albert Einstein's book, a man widely considered to be one of the greatest thinkers in history. Beginning when he was employed by Princeton University, Einstein would walk around 1.5 miles to get to and from work each day. This became an essential part of his daily routine, and something that he believed that his intellect greatly benefited from. 12. Paul Erdős. One name that every mathematician knows is Paul Erdős. He was such a big deal that people in the field use what's called an Erdős number, referring to how far removed a researcher is from a publication with Erdős. But something less known about him that might explain how he was able to produce so much research was that he was a regular user of amphetamines. One of those close friends, Ronald Graham, bet Erdős $500 that he couldn't abstain from the drug for a full month. The prize was too good for Erdős to pass by. He ended up lasting the month to win the bet, but found that his work rate and creativity had suffered so much that he immediately began taking them again. 11. Igor Stravinsky and headstands. While it was amphetamines for Paul Erdős, Russian composer Igor Stravinsky had a much more wholesome secret for creativity. Anytime he would get stuck on a piece of music, he took a break and did a headstand to clear the brain before resuming his work. It turns out that Stravinsky didn't have it completely upside down. Science has found that headstands improve circulation and can help you gain mental space. 10. Novelist Henri's coffee addiction. Are you one of those people who can't function without their morning coffee? If so, then me too. So long as it's that Reese's coffee, that's fantastic. And so too with the French writer Henri de Balzac. The French are known for their coffee intake, but Balzac took this to a completely new level. He drank 50 cups a day. For reference, the recommended amount is 400 milligrams a day, which equates to around 5 cups. Drinking 10 times that amount fueled Balzac for between 12 and 15 hours, helping to produce over 91 pieces of work over his career. He believed that ideas move after drinking coffee. 9. Ludwig van Beethoven's watery wake-ups. While Henri's path to creativity was paved by coffee, Beethoven's was a different liquid. He was tormented by a harsh childhood of instability and roughness, leading to some strange habits developing later in his career. Before playing piano, he would at times pour a bucket of water over his head, leaving him sitting in wet clothes, his hands soaked, and his entire body nearly freezing cold. It's not exactly known what the thought process behind this practice was, but there's no denying that Beethoven's philosophy was working, launching him to stardom from a young age, drawing comparisons to Mozart. 8. Edgar Allan Poe wrote on scrolls. Edgar Allan Poe, one of America's greatest writers, lived in the early 19th century. As long ago as that might sound, there were notebooks, pens, ink, and equipment available for any writer at the time. So why Poe preferred to write on thin pieces of paper rather than in a book is a bit of a mystery. It did allow him to roll them up, just like a scroll, allowing for storage and giving them ancient, near-religious character though. 7. Pythagoras hated beans. Pythagoras is remembered for all his mathematical and geometrical theories, some of which you've probably learned at school. But there was an entire school of thought behind Pythagoras, some of which was downright strange. One of those beliefs, for example, was to always slip the left shoe on after the right one. Another was related to food. Pythagoras somehow concluded that humans are more similar to beans than almost any other food. For him, that meant that eating beans would be the same as eating a fellow human. Now, I don't know about you, but my math teacher never taught me that part. 6. Charles Darwin ate insects. Charles Darwin, author of The Origin of Species and one of the greatest evolutionary biologists in history, had a fascination for animals stretching back to his university days. That included eating them as well as observing them. He participated in a foreign food club where they ate any uncommon animal they could get their hands on, including insects like beetles. As he graduated from his studies and began traveling the world, Darwin was able to expand his tastes from birds and iguanas to puma and tortoise. 5. Tycho Brahe's drunk moose. Before Galileo invented the telescope in the early 17th century, the stars, planets, and moons had to be studied purely through human eye observations. There were observatories, but mainly to measure the distance and relationship between objects. Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe is remembered as the last astronomer of note to use these techniques before the telescope. And maybe he could sense that his profession was on the verge of a titanic shift, because he had a particular lifestyle that went along with his work. For one, he kept a moose as a pet that accompanied him almost everywhere he went. But that wasn't it. Brahe was also a borderline alcoholic, which he shared with his pet moose. Sadly, it ended in tragedy when the moose fell down some stairs and died. 4. Charles Dickens' OCD and epilepsy. Behind his brilliant writing, Charles Dickens suffered from a number of medical conditions. One of those started as a child when he began experiencing seizures and was soon diagnosed with epilepsy. Back then, it was called the falling sickness, and little was known about its nature or how to treat it. If that wasn't bad enough, Dickens also had chronic insomnia and was excessively controlling about his behavior, from combing his hair to arranging his routine and household. If he were analyzed today, Dickens would likely be a textbook case of obsessive-compulsive disorder. 3. Leonardo da Vinci and his sleep schedule. There is nothing better than a long, recharging sleep, and most experts recommend at least 7 hours a night, but there are exceptions. The Italian genius Leonardo da Vinci seemed to fit firmly into this exceptional category. He preferred to space his sleep out into smaller segments and even came up with an entire system called the polyphasic sleep process. To follow it, you have 20-minute power naps throughout the day, which in total add up to 5 hours over the course of the whole day. It might have worked for Da Vinci, but I don't think any medical professional would recommend it for us regular folk. 2. James Watt. A Scottish engineer whose biggest claim to fame was refining the steam engine, James Watt was showing signs of his towering intellect from a young age. As he got older, though, his mental health suffered. He was constantly depressed, doubting his self-worth, and unhappy with his work. This may have driven his success and innovation, but it also deprived him of sleep and left him with blinding migraines. Watt was a key part of the Industrial Revolution, contributions that have earned him a place on the 50-pound note. 1. Freud's cocaine habit. As early as last century, cocaine was an ingredient in Coca-Cola, around the same time that medical professionals were experimenting with the possible benefits of the drug. One of those was Sigmund Freud, who promoted it as a pain reliever and as a treatment against depression as far back as his university days. Freud gave it to his patients, unwittingly hooking them on one of the most addictive substances known to man. More than that, though, he experimented with cocaine himself, receiving large samples from pharmaceutical companies, which at the time manufactured and sold it freely. Many of his detractors argue that much of his psychoanalysis work is heavily influenced by a possible cocaine addiction. So, who's your favorite inventor? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and check out our social medias, including my personal ones, links in the description. And also, are we ending too soon? I know, it might seem like it, but don't worry. We've got plenty more strange stories about inventors. From the awkward date that inspired the credit card to the maintenance man who created the Game Boy, just click here to keep watching. Trust me, it's the internet. It's never done. I've done thousands of these. Oh my God, I've done thousands of these videos. So you'll never run out of List 25 videos. I promise. Just click here, watch more.